Hey everybody, Rob Maurer here, and today we've got a pretty major Tesla news day, a lot going on, including what seems to be our biggest leak so far for Tesla's next generation full self-driving hardware. We've got updates from the US government and from Tesla on Tesla's plans for the Supercharger network in the United States, some upgrade rumors out of China, extended delivery wait times, and quite a few other things as well. Quick look at the stock, sort of a strange trading day for Tesla today, but ended pretty well, up 2.4% to close at $214.24, while the Nasdaq was up 0.9% on the day. Tesla did receive some favorable commentary from Barclays today, with an overweight rating and a $275 price target on the stock. In the auto industry, they view Tesla as the most favorably positioned, both in the near term and the long term, saying, quote, "We are hard pressed to see any company in the auto landscape as the quote unquote next Tesla, as Tesla has been quite unique in its accomplishments," end quote. Also noting that if they had to choose someone that demonstrated similar characteristics, they would select Rivian. As we continue to see more and more funds update their holdings for the end of the year, there was a report today that a fund managed by Natixis had actually acquired a nearly $40 billion position in Tesla, but that did turn out to be a filing error, so if you did happen to see that news, just wanted to point out that correction. Tesla last evening also posted a couple of SEC filings, a Form 13G and a Form 5. The 13G was just disclosure of Elon Musk's holdings, which stand at 716 million shares of Tesla. That count does include the vested options from the 2018 CEO compensation plan, which remain unexercised at this point in time. It says that they are exercisable within 60 days. That just means they can be exercised, not that Elon would have to by that date, which is important to know because when Elon eventually does exercise those, that's likely to be accompanied by a lot of shares being sold to cover the taxes on those options. Based on how that plan was structured, though, it should still be many years before we have to worry about any sales relating to those specific shares. The Form 5 then, that disclosed the transfer of about 11.5 million shares of Tesla stock. The form designates this as a gift, and we can see at the bottom in the footnotes that this represents a bona fide gift of the issuer's common stock by the reporting person, Elon Musk in this case, to charity. So we don't know which charity, but these donations happened in tranches from August to December, with the shares at those times being worth around $2 billion in aggregate. It's also possible and relatively common that those shares would be immediately sold by the receiving charity, but again, we don't have any way of knowing that. They could continue to hold them, but generally not the case. So those shares probably added to the selling pressure, especially in the fourth quarter. All right, moving on from the stock, I want to start off with an update on Tesla's delivery timeframe estimates in the design studio. The Model Y has been updated in the United States, now lists the long-range version as an April to June delivery window. That is pushed back a month from the March to May window that was previously listed. So continued strong signs of demand for the Model Y. The performance version, that stayed at March to April, but as we have talked about, we've seen a couple of price increases on the performance version in particular. So with Tesla calling out that deliveries by March have potential eligibility for the $7,500 federal tax credit, and then some uncertainty on the tax credit after that timeline, I do wonder if we're seeing people shift into the Model Y Performance just because they're trying to get it earlier, make sure they take delivery in March while there is more clarity. That could be responsible for the push out for the long-range version if Tesla is prioritizing performance production, and could be a big factor in the last couple of price increases that we have seen on the Performance. If that is happening, and it seems likely that it would be happening to some degree, how much so would be more of the question. That might mean that Q1 sees a higher mix of Model Y performance vehicles than we normally see, which would help margins, obviously. That would be isolated to the US in terms of that impact, so it's not going to be huge to the total bottom line, but might help stem some of the impact of the price cuts a little bit. Anyway, nice to see these multiple signs of strength for Model Y demand with the price increases that we have talked about, and now delivery estimates moving out as well. I don't believe we had any change in the estimates on the other three vehicles. The Model 3 and the Model S both still February to March, and then the Model X a little bit wider of a window as we have talked about before. That can range anywhere from February to May depending on the exact trim selected. Alex Potter of Piper Sandler did put out a brief note discussing the wait time increases today. They've reiterated their $300 price target and overweight rating, saying, quote, "Due to a superior cost structure, we think Tesla is singularly capable of cutting prices while preserving cash flow and keeping its plants running near maximum capacity. We regard Tesla as a cornerstone multi-year holding, and we reiterate our overweight rating," end quote. All right, next up, we've got some really big news on the Supercharger network. The US government today has shared a plethora of information on how the investment in EV charging stations is going to work. It's going to take time to comb through all this information. There are hundreds of pages of documents, but the White House did publish a fact sheet, and that fact sheet did discuss Tesla specifically. It says, quote, Tesla for the first time will open a portion of its US Supercharger and destination charger network to non-Tesla EVs, making at least 7,500 chargers available for all EVs by the end of 2024. The open chargers will be distributed across the United States. They will include at least 3,500 new and existing 250 kilowatt superchargers along highway corridors to expand freedom of travel for all EVs and level 2 destination charging at locations like hotels and restaurants in urban and rural locations. All EV drivers will be able to access these stations using the Tesla app or website. Additionally, Tesla will more than double its full nationwide network of superchargers manufactured in Buffalo, New York, end quote. All right, so a lot in there. We'll talk about opening up the network first. As we know, Tesla has piloted this in Europe, has said it's coming to the United States, but we haven't had much detail on it yet. Now we see the commitment to open up 3,500 superchargers at least by the end of 2024. If we look at Tesla's total supercharger network, worldwide there are about 43,000 superchargers at about 4,700 supercharging stations. Supercharge.info estimates that about 39% of those stations are in North America, so maybe 17,000 superchargers in North America right now. I don't know, maybe 90% of those would be in the US, so 15,000 or so, probably as good of a guess as any. So 3,500 out of 15,000, that would be just under 25%. But that's today's current network, but this says opening up 3,500 by the end of 2024, and pairing that with the other big revelation in here, that Tesla will be doubling the United States supercharger network, that grows the network to 30,000, and you're talking, a little bit more than 10% of the supercharging network being made available. So that number and that percent could grow, and I would imagine that it would over time, but that should comfort any Tesla customers that fear other EVs taking up space on the network, making things more inconvenient. Presumably Tesla can manage this in a way that really minimizes that risk. It'll be interesting to see if Tesla prefers to make around 10% of locations available for other EVs, or just make a select subset of chargers at specific locations available for other EVs, which would broaden the distribution, more coverage, but minimize sort of a worst case impact scenario for Tesla customers where they show up and all the stalls are taken by non-Tesla vehicles that maybe are taking longer to charge or whatever else. So my best guess would be that we see a mix of that, probably leaning more towards select stalls just because that really makes for a much broader distribution for what other EVs can access. Then of course, as everyone likes to point out, if you do have other EVs that only have 1 or 2 slots and someone shows up and they're having to sit there and wait while they see a bunch of Teslas come in and out and charge, well, maybe that convinces them to switch to a Tesla. That definitely has some merit. I doubt that is Tesla's main goal though. That is still ultimately a poor customer experience for those other EVs, and they are a patron of Tesla's business there with the supercharging network. So I don't think the goal would necessarily be to give them a poor experience and try to force them into switching to Tesla, but could end up being more of a side effect of how things eventually are structured. So we'll see how that all shakes out. A couple other things on this. It does mention other customers using the Tesla app or website. That's a huge positive, I think, because there had been some language about having to have a dedicated hardware payment option, which would just be a huge headache when Tesla already has such a smooth implementation without that. So it sounds like that will be avoided, which is really good news. Then in general, I think this announcement, including Tesla, and I think Tesla was actually the first mentioned in sort of the by company breakdown area. Hopefully that means that some of what Tesla is doing here is going to be eligible for some of these investment funds, hopefully without having to make any huge overhauls to the structure. Now, again, lots of documents here. Hopefully over time we can kind of shake out how the funding here is going to work. Also notable on this, President Biden did actually acknowledge Elon Musk and Tesla on this on Twitter today, saying, quote, "In building our EV charging network, we have to ensure that as many chargers work for as many drivers as possible. To that end, Elon Musk will open a big part of Tesla's network up to all drivers. That's a big deal, and it'll make a big difference," end quote. Elon responding cordially, saying, "Thank you, Tesla is happy to support other EVs via our supercharger network." So hey, nice to see that, and maybe a small, very little sign that that relationship could be moving in a more positive direction. Finally then, just a couple of points on the doubling of the network that is mentioned. It's implied in the announcement that that would happen end of year 2024. It's not explicitly stated, but Tesla did confirm that timeline on Twitter. So that's extremely exciting. That should actually be a faster rate of growth than what we have seen recently for Tesla on the US Supercharger network. Looking at supercharger.info, it looks like the last doubling probably happened since mid-2020, maybe a little bit later than that, but probably 2.5 years or so. And here we're talking probably a little bit less than 2 years. So faster growth off of a much bigger base, which can make even maintaining a similar growth rate more challenging. On this, you may also remember that late last week we had a rumor that said that Tesla was planning to double the supercharger capacity in the next 18 months or so. So I think this announcement adds credibility to that rumor, of which there were a couple of other components. One being that this person was at Giga Texas and said about 50% of the factory is dedicated to Cybertruck production. And then this person also had apparently said that we feel like 2023 is going to be the big year for Tesla. So let's hope that last one at least is true as well. Oh, last real quick thought on this. If Tesla is aggressively expanding the supercharger network like this, I would hope that a lot of that expansion ends up being version 4 superchargers. If that's almost ready to go, you would probably want to wait a little bit and then do the massive expansion once those are ready. So I don't know, maybe with the timing of this, we hear more about this at Investor Day. Speaking of version 4 of things, we've got a really interesting update on hardware 4 on Twitter today from Green the Only. Often has a lot of insight into Tesla's development or FSD related things. And today he has shared a number of images from what he claims is a refreshed car computer from a Model X and some other accompanying hardware. He believes that Tesla has started to build cars with this hardware but has not delivered them yet. So perhaps an announcement pending for Investor Day. And like we had previously talked about, Tesla had received approval in Europe for some updated autopilot hardware. So maybe some vehicles with this hardware on a boat being shipped out. So it definitely feels like we're getting very close now to hardware 4. There's a lot of interesting information here. Green says to start with the sort of bad news, the form factor is totally different on the FSD computer. So likely no retrofits, which of course Elon had previously made pretty clear. Then there's an update on the infotainment system. Green says that the GPU is now on the same board, which makes things thinner. Otherwise, no changes on that front. And then on other hardware, he says that there is now a radar and a radar heater. Presumably, this would be the high definition one that we have talked quite a bit about. But just a reminder that although Tesla had removed radar from other vehicles previously, Elon, even at that time, said that HD radar is the only thing that is relevant. Green also says there's a new GPS module with a tri-band antenna. He says it's not labeled, so he doesn't know who makes it, but wouldn't be surprised if, to an extent, it is custom Tesla hardware, which probably makes sense. Last August, there was a patent application that was disclosed from Tesla for a multi-band GPS antenna, with some of the benefits for autonomous driving being discussed in that patent application. I tried to do some digging on the current GPS modules to see how much of a change this may be, but didn't have a ton of luck on that, so if anyone can help me with that, that would be appreciated. I'm curious how big of a step forward this GPS unit might be, if this is a move more towards high precision GPS, or if it's just more for improving the robustness and reliability of the GPS signal. So interesting hardware changes there, and then probably what people are most interested in would be cameras. So Green says that there are now 12 fully populated camera connectors. One of those connectors is marked as spare, so potentially looking at 11 different cameras here, and Green runs through how each of those camera connectors is labeled. They're a little bit vague, so we kind of move into speculation territory, with probably the most uncertainty around 4 cameras that contain in part a label FF, which Green's best guess for would be front fender. That may very well be, we're all guessing here, but I think if we lay that out next to the current hardware, it doesn't quite fit. If we look at the current hardware, we know we've got the 8 external cameras, and then the interior camera would make 9. I think we can roughly line that up with the new names that we've got here for these 11 connectors, and then what cameras those might link to. So 1 and 2, just the main camera and the wide camera, both facing forward. And then it looks like the narrow forward-facing camera has been eliminated, which would match up with previous rumors. Quick reminder on that point is that not only do we expect some changes in the layout of the cameras, but also in terms of the quality of the cameras. Obviously, nothing is confirmed, but previous rumors have suggested 4 to 5 times the resolution for hardware 4 cameras from hardware 3. So narrow camera is gone, and then we get into these 4 FF cameras. We've got RFF side, LFF side, RFF rear, and LFF rear, which if that does mean front fender, perhaps means that the cameras that are in the pillars would be moving forward, which could definitely help with seeing cross traffic without having to creep so far forward. The repeater cameras in hardware 3, those are already in the front fender, so that would fit into this naming scheme without any changes there. So we'll pause on the discussion of those 4 for a second and come back to it. Rounding out the rest of the cameras, there is one labeled as backup. Presumably that would be the rear camera or the backup camera. There is selfie, obviously the interior, and then 3 cameras that really seem to be the new additions: FSVC, RSVC, and LSVC. Green points out that in Tesla's electronic parts catalog, SVC refers to bumpers. So we're probably looking at bumper forward, bumper right, and bumper left. Obviously, this would help with the removal of the ultrasonic sensors. I think the big question here would be the location of the right and the left bumper cameras. Are those on the front bumper or are those on the back? If these are on the front bumper and they face sideways, then that would alleviate any need to pull the pillar cameras forward, And that's obviously as far forward as you're going to get a side camera, so that would probably be the best location for assessing cross traffic. I think Tesla still believes you can probably make it happen with the side pillar cameras, but if you've driven FSD beta, you've almost certainly encountered a situation where that placement is suboptimal. Now, maybe if this does mean front fender and those get pulled forward a little bit, that alleviates that, but then you also lose the advantage that the pillar cameras have of the added height, which is that really worth giving up? I'm not too sure. Now, the problem with the bumper cameras is how do you keep those clean? But we've already got a forward bumper camera here, so Tesla's got to have some sort of plan for that forward bumper camera and could use that same plan for a side-facing camera as well. So if these are in the front bumper facing sideways, I don't see any advantage to pulling the pillar cameras down and putting those more forward in the front fender. Then you're really just giving up the height. So what would FF mean in that type of a scenario? I don't know. Forward facing, probably not, because the repeater cameras face the rear, and those seem pretty highly likely to not change. Further in favor of the pillar cameras remaining, the Cybertruck prototypes that we have seen over the years have had that pillar camera. Unfortunately, the most recent couple of shots of the Cybertruck prototypes out and about, we're not able to tell one way or the other on those. However, for the recent Model 3s with manufacturer plates that we have seen covered in the front and the back, and remember Elon liking a tweet talking about those being Project Highland, those do still have pillar cameras. So if part of what they're covering there is related to hardware 4, that would still seem to have the pillar cameras. And then the last point in support of that is that prior leaks that we had, particularly one about the forward-facing cameras going down from 3 to 2, which now seems to be accurate. Those leaks or rumors or whatever you want to call them, those did talk about changes to the pillar camera area, specifically adding a heating element. So with all of that, it would seem pretty surprising if the side pillar cameras moved, and if they don't, I think that would pretty sharply increase the likelihood that these right and left bumper cameras are in the front. So there's a lot of supporting evidence favoring that setup, but one thing possibly contradicting that is that a couple of years ago when the forward bumper camera on the Cybertruck was spotted, the same person that spotted that said that there is also a dual camera in the rear, which would then sound a lot like a left and the right. But then what's the backup camera for? Do you have 3 back there? That doesn't seem to be what they spotted. Plus, this is a little bit older information. So in my view, that is still a little bit less likely. So very in the weeds, I know, and hopefully we get all of this information from Tesla directly relatively soon, but I think it's interesting and it's obviously a hugely important part of Tesla going forward. So definitely curious to hear people's thoughts on how this is set up, and either way, extremely exciting that we're hopefully starting to learn a little bit more. All right, if you are still sticking around, we've got an update on Tesla in China as well, and could be related to what we've just talked about. Bloomberg today reporting that Tesla is going to be pausing some production at Giga Shanghai until the end of February, which is of course interesting timing given the investor day on March 1st, but they say it is for upgrades to the facility to start rolling out a revamped version of its Model 3 sedan. They go on to say that the plant has 2 phases for vehicle manufacturing, and some workers on the first phase won't be allowed on production lines from as soon as Sunday for these upgrades. Kind of interestingly, they also say that Tesla has been upgrading the lines in stages over the past 2 months, but even with this timing, apparently their sources are saying that the new Model 3 deliveries are expected to begin later this year, which later this year obviously could mean 2 weeks, 3 weeks, but seems to imply a little bit later on. So I don't have any more information on this. We'll have to wait and see, but definitely an interesting couple of weeks here heading into Investor Day. The last part of this Bloomberg report, they do say that orders for made in China Teslas have started to flatten since the start of this month after an initial frenzy, according to one of the sources. I think that's to be expected. We've talked a lot about that, but at the same time, wait times in China aren't super long. The insured vehicle registration numbers, not super high. So if there is a bit of a plateau in orders, then I wouldn't be all that surprised if that level is a little bit lower than what Tesla would be hoping. But with these possible changes on the way, may not necessarily be all that relevant anyway. All right, last few items here we'll go through pretty quickly. We've got an update on Tesla and Mexico. Yesterday, Mexico's foreign minister said that he has met with Tesla senior executives and is apparently saying that there is quote unquote good news on the way. So basically a continuation of what we have been hearing, but looks like something happening there. Then we've got an update on Giga Berlin. RBB24 today reporting on comments from Brandenburg Economics Minister Jörg Steinbach, who has told the state parliament that Tesla has put its battery factory at Giga Berlin into operation, but that at the moment, Tesla is only producing battery components there, with further production plans being moved to the United States as a result of the Inflation Reduction Act. So there had been some rumors on that, I think some denial of that, but it kind of sounds like that is the current state of things at Giga Berlin. Good to see at least some element of production is happening there on batteries though. And then next, just a couple of quick takeaways from an Elon Musk interview at the World Government Summit, in which Elon actually took the opportunity to warn a little bit about some of the risks of a world government. But as far as business comments go, he did talk about the Twitter CEO position. A lot of places reporting this as him saying that he'll appoint a CEO by the end of the year. But his actual comment was a little bit less concrete than that. He said, quote, "I don't know, I'm guessing probably towards the end of this year would be good timing to find a new Twitter CEO," end quote. Noting that first, Twitter needs to get to financial stability and have a very clear product roadmap. Lastly then, yesterday on Valentine's Day, Tesla on Twitter posted a short little video saying, "Find your perfect match." And it was a video about all of their different robots and some of the characteristics that they have that may be appealing. Kind of a funny video from Tesla, but one of the cutscenes showed a frame being moved around and people were speculating that maybe that was the Cybertruck frame. From some further research, it looks like that's a Model X frame, so that is my assessment on that piece. But that will finally wrap it up for today. So as always, thank you for listening. Make sure you're subscribed and signed up for notifications. You can also find me on Twitter at Tesla Podcast. And we'll see you tomorrow for the Thursday, February 16th episode of Tesla Daily. Thank you.